So what we have here, Dan, is on the side of the door, there's lots of little chips in the paint, little tiny ones, and it's because the owner, their dog, when they get home, it runs out to see them, and of course it jumps up on the side of the door. And this is probably pretty common for anybody that owns a dog. But how would you go about fixing so many little chips on a big flat panel like that?
There's a couple of ways, but the technique we recommend for this type of damage, it's called the shoe polish technique. And what it essentially is taking a non-lint free cloth, the same wiping cloth that we give in the commercial systems and in the do-it-yourself kits, and you take the mouth and cap off the bottle, cover the cloth over the top of the bottle, turn it upside down so you got paint on the cloth, and then you simply just shoe polish over the area until you cover the entire area that's damaged with a thin film of paint.
Okay, well at this point, this is where you need to determine which color to use. So could you show me, how do you go about selecting the right color for this car out of the complete selection that you have here?
Sure, it's a visual match. So what you do is each of these bottles is sprayed with the color of the paint that's inside the bottle. And so I've picked out 4 here that are visually close, at least from what I can see, to the color of the car. And I'll put it up to the panel and I will just eyeball it. And on a car like this, a darker colored car, I like to tend towards a little bit darker colored color. So I'm going to pick this one. You can't go wrong if you happen to make a mistake. You can pull the paint off with the Seal-Act and start over.
Okay, so but as a general rule of thumb, on a darker color, if you had to choose between lighter or darker, you'd edge towards the darker side.
Correct. It seems to blend better in the darker colors if you go with a slightly darker color in the paint. I would steer towards the opposite with silvers and golds. You want to tend to the lighter side because the metallic content in those paints can cause the paint to look a little darker in chipped areas.
Okay, so then go ahead and show us this thing called the shoe polish technique.
Okay, this particular commercial color, this is not the OEM color, this is our internal color code, but shake it up. Once you get those BBs shook and it's nicely mixed, take the cap off. I'm going to put the cap down here and grab the wiping cloth.
That's the lint-free wiping cloth, so it's not
lint-free
going to leave
wiping
anything
cloth.
behind.
Correct. You don't want to use something that's going to leave residue on the panel. Now, I'm going to cover this up, go over, and you're going to see there's a little bit of paint on here. And I'm just going to start shoe polishing. It's like you would see if you were shoe polishing your shoe with some black dye. And what it's going to do, it's going to fill in those little chips, which with the many number of chips that are on this panel, it would take an awful long time. It would be very tedious to try to do this using our typical dab and smear method.
Sure, because there's just so many of them.
There is. There's hundreds of little chips. And this way you're going to be able to fill in most of them within just a minute or two. And I keep getting this wet. The paint's drying quickly because I'm putting such a thin layer of paint on the car.
And the thinner the coat, the less drying time you need to let pass before you go ahead and wipe the excess off.
Correct. And the Seal-Act's going to take away this excess paint, and the paint that's in the chips will be sealed in the chips and stay behind.
Well, this so far looks pretty simple. Like I think I could do this.
Yeah. And that's it. Now you could always come back if after the second step, when we use the Seal-Act, you happen to pull some of the paint out of the chips. You can always come back and do a second application.
So there's no way to make a permanent mistake. You can always back out and start over again.
Correct. And you could back it off and you could go over it with a different color.
Sure. So Dan, now that a few minutes have gone by, what's the next step?
The next step, now that the paint has dried on the panel, is to use the Seal-Act blending agent to activate the paint so that we can begin to remove the excess paint and seal the remaining paint that's left in the chips, seal it behind.
Hey, before you do that, I want to ask, because if I'm wondering, other people might be also, but the name Seal-Act, blending solution, what does the word Seal-Act mean?
It's one of two things. It activates the paint, it softens the paint.
Okay.
The seal is a sealant that we put into the solution that will actually help the paint that's stayed behind in the chips to cure properly.
Okay, so there's actually a meaning behind the word.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's see do your magic.
Okay. Now this is the Seal-Act. We put it in 8-ounce bottles for the commercial system, but they come in a gallon. Make sure you shake it up. It does separate quickly, and you want to make sure it's got a nice smooth pink consistency to it before you apply it to the cloth. And be liberal with it. When you're taking off quite a bit of paint, which is what I put on this panel when I shoe polished it, you want to have enough on the cloth to start to activate and soften the paint. Now I'm just lightly covering the area. I'm not rubbing hard, I'm just kind of gliding my hand over this area, and I'll let it set up. Now you can see it's already starting to take away some of the excess paint. And it also is softening the paint that's on the panel. So I'm going very lightly, and I'm kind of keeping my eye to the panel so you can see the excess paint coming off. Again, don't scrub. If you scrub, you're going to end up taking the paint out of the chipped areas.
And if you did, though, then you just repeat the process.
Yeah, and on something like this, there's literally hundreds of chips on this panel. It's very possible you may have to come back and do a second application. But it's quick and easy. This entire process is going to take us maybe 10 minutes, and we should have a very nice result.
I noticed that the lint-free wiping cloth has a very flat surface. Now, that's key to how this actually works, isn't it?
Absolutely. You don't want to use something that's thick or abrasive because it'll grab onto the paint and pull paint from the chipped areas. Now, I've done just this bottom part of the panel. I'm going to wipe it off with the microfiber towel. And I'll come back and I'll hit a few. There's probably going to be a couple chips here that I have to hit a second time. But again, it's a very quick, it'd be very tedious to cover those 100 to 200 chips that were on this panel one at a time using our dab and smear process. Now, you could also use the squeegee process, but we'll show that in another application. If the paint starts to stick to the wiping cloth, just take a little bit more of the Seal-Act, shake it up, perhaps get a little cleaner section of the cloth, moisten it, and then just keep wiping on the panel. And I like to have the microfiber towel ready because once you see that that excess paint's gone, buff it so it comes out to a very nice shine.
You probably have a real short window of time after the final wipe to
Yeah, you don't want to let it sit
over
for long, otherwise it could leave just a little smear. You just need to wet it again and it'll come off. But
well, and that's the little techniques that help a guy do the job right the first time.
Yeah.
So it's important.
Yeah. The nice part about our system, though, Mike, is very difficult to make mistakes that are going to do any damage to the car. You may not have the perfect result on your first pass, but you can do multiple passes, and that generally results in a better repair.
I think the word is recover. If you don't get it right the first time, you can recover just by repeating the step.
Right.
And of course, practice makes perfect. The more you do this, the better you get, the faster you get, and that means the more profitable you become.
Absolutely. You're going to save a lot of time with this method when you're dealing with true road rash type damage. And you'll see it, on the tire, on the back wheels when the rocks get thrown up against the panel and the fender.
Yeah, that's a real common place for gravel splatter, or road rash as it's called.
Yeah, and it'll make it look great. Now I can see, if I look up close here, I can see little bits of excess paint still on the panel, so I'm just focusing on that now.
Like little high spots?
Yeah.
Little paint residues?
And I'll take a step back generally and look at it from 3 feet, and oftentimes you can see maybe a couple areas that you missed, and you can just re-hit those, and it should look really good.
Well, you're making this look easy.
It is easy. Sometimes it takes a little patience, especially when you're dealing with a heavily chipped up car, but you know what? In many cases, you can prevent a panel that has to be resprayed from being resprayed, and that saves thousands of dollars in some cases.
Oh, for sure. And of course, this is a permanent repair.
Correct. This paint, once cured, is permanently in those chips. And that's it. So I would step away from this, take a look at it from a couple different angles. Sometimes you can pick up some chips that you missed, but for the most part, the lion's share of those chips that were there are covered.
Yeah, and that was a lot of chips.
Yes.
So that's called the shoe polish technique.
That is the shoe polish technique.
So a different technique for different types of defects that you got to repair.
Correct.
Okay, well, looks good. Let's call that one done.
Very good. Thank you.